Welcome to the Sri Lankan Understanding, a platform on which we explore the past of Sri Lanka, an island in the Indian Ocean. We look at where the country is at present and look to the future, the potential and the need for strategizing in achieving the best possible objectives for this country. Our topic for discussion today is Sri Lankans overseas, deciphering the diaspora. To discuss this with us today, we have the head of the Department of International Relations at the University of Colombo, the university from which she earned her first degree. Her master's is from the Notre Dame University, and her PhD in conflict analysis and resolution is from the George Mason University. She is also a published author. We are indeed honored to have with us today Dr. Maneesha Wanasinghe Pasqual. Thank you very much, Dr. Wanasinghe Pasqual, for joining us on the program today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Let's start with the term diaspora. Now, there's a lot in terms of the origin of this word, the context in which it is used. Could you help us decipher this?
Well, the diaspora, at least the word itself, is from a Greek, two words to give meaning to scatter. From the place of origin to scatter, or like seeds, you scatter the seeds. So the origin of the words is closely associated with the Jewish diaspora, who were forcibly expelled from their home of origin. And they lived scattered in the Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and African regions. So the word diaspora is initially, that word you have to realize, initially associated with forced expulsion. But the word has transformed. So the forced expulsion or the negative connotations of diaspora was and is used to link with the Armenian diaspora, the slave diaspora, the African slaves who were forced to flee, well, not exactly flee, but they were forced out of their countries into slavery. So you have that negative connotation of diaspora, but you also have positive connotations of diaspora and one or two in-between ideas. For example, the in-between idea is during the colonial period, where people left their country of origin as indentured servants hopefully for a better future in another country, maybe to Kenya, maybe from India to Sri Lanka. And then you also have more positive connotations of diaspora, which is the current definition which combines the negative and the positive. So the positive connotations are people who left the country of origin for educational purposes, for employment. This is a modern, or that's another kind of division of diaspora, which means the modern definition as well as the traditional definition, or the negative and the positive definitions. So yeah, there are different understandings of diaspora, and it's a very complex meaning, but it just means that you're scattered and you left your home country, but you have not forgotten that home country. So in a sense, one foot is in the home country and the other is in the host country, and you're living physically in the host country, but your heart, your memories, the mythologies, the narratives that you tell your children, some of the words, some of the food is linked to the home country. So you're not fully, let's say, Americanized, or you are not a full citizen of Norway. You are technically, but your heart and your sense of who you are still has that home. So that is the kind of the summary of the definitions of what is a diaspora.
We've had many Sri Lankans migrating for decades now. They've made so many other countries their new homes around the world. What key factors drive people to undertake migration of this nature? And given the fact that it's rather traumatic to end life virtually in one country and begin it all over again in another.
Yes. Sri Lanka has had three waves of diaspora traveling from during the colonial period, not so much Sri Lankan diaspora, but we've had examples of Sri Lankans who migrated to England. And so that's the first wave during the colonial period. Second wave was from 1948 to about 1984, when people left for education purposes and remained for employment purposes. And the third wave, which was soon after 1983 riots, but not immediately after, almost till 1984. And after 84, it's a combination between the employment, education, and asylum. So there are people who refugees and asylum seekers who were granted asylum only after 1984. So everyone who went before that and became citizens or permanent residents of a country did so because of employment reasons or educational reasons. Those were the only reasons they were allowed to migrate. Except for the Burgher community, which they were allowed to come because they were partially white people, so they were allowed to reside in Australia and New Zealand and England and other places like that. So it was only, so the three waves are very clear, but from 84 onwards, people who left in a combination. Even those who later gained asylum, some of them went for educational purposes. But only until 84, everyone who left Sri Lanka went for educational. That means they were highly skilled individuals. But the diaspora who emerged after 84 were a combination of highly skilled individuals, but also ordinary people with potential skills who sought asylum. So there's a combination there.
Absolutely. So when we come back, we're going to be talking about the influence of these communities and how these communities are making an impact in their new countries, and also the impact that they can make on their home country, their country of origin. When we return with the Sri Lankan Understanding, as we talk about Sri Lankans overseas, deciphering the diaspora. Welcome back to the Sri Lankan Understanding. We're in conversation with Dr. Maneesha Wanasinghe Pasqual, and we're focusing on Sri Lankans overseas, deciphering the diaspora. Before we went to the break, we talked about the term diaspora, where this term has originated, how it has gradually evolved, and how Sri Lanka has also seen waves going overseas. When we talk about these people, as you very rightly mentioned, their hearts are still in their home country that they left behind. How influential are they in their new homes, their new countries of residence?
Now, first of all, we don't have full statistical information on how many Sri Lankan, that is Sinhala, Tamil, Muslim, Burgher communities are residing outside of Sri Lanka. We still don't have that data. However, what is interesting is, other than India, majority of the Sri Lankan diaspora, or expatriates as some of them like to call themselves, reside in Western Europe, North America, that's Canada and USA, and Australia, New Zealand. These countries are democracies, and as voting citizens, these individuals have a lot of say, whether to their councilmen, the senators, the immediate representatives, on what they perceive as unfair decisions, or what they perceive as where the focus should be. You have to realize that the diaspora, I'm not talking just about Sri Lankan diaspora, but the Jewish diaspora are extraordinarily powerful in USA. So just like that, every diaspora strives to achieve that kind of influence in their host country. So that the Jewish diaspora are key decision makers. They help policies, they help kind of swerve the policies. So that is a given fact. And during the tsunami period, or even before, when in the late 1990s and early 2000s, when LTT was trying to be banned, you can see the influence of the diaspora in the host country. That was very evident. And even in 2008, when the diaspora were against what was happening in Sri Lanka, you can see how influential they were in Australia when they went on marches, and lots of other countries. So they have not only the ability to coordinate and get together, but the Sri Lankan diaspora also have the ear of the immediate representative to a democratic process. Some of them even have direct access through emails to the president or the prime minister, because that is part of the democratization process that is in the countries that they live. And so you can see that majority of the Sri Lankan, I would say almost 90% of the Sri Lankan diaspora live in countries which are democratic, and as democratic countries they do have a voice. And you have to be proud of the fact that majority of the Sri Lankans who left and are residing and gained citizenship are doing excellent. They are in high places, they are making our country proud in who they are and what they work and where they what they have achieved. So you can see that they do have a voice in the host country.
Because whatever the professions they may have gotten into, some of them have even gone into parliaments in those countries. They've gone on to become governors of states in those countries. They are heading law enforcement agencies, the medical profession, whatever it may be, across the spectrum. We've seen key Sri Lankans who are out there, who are making a name for themselves in their new countries. And we also understand from that the diaspora is quite diverse. It's not a homogeneous group of one monolith of people. It's very, very heterogeneous, very diverse there. And that's where you find factors which are with Sri Lanka, might be against some issues in Sri Lanka. From a Sri Lankan perspective, how important is this community out there?
We saw how important they were when the tsunami came, how quickly the Sri Lankan diaspora in different countries, scattered all over, tried to help. Some, we tend to think in terms of, well, how would they help finance the country? How would they provide investments? But you have to realize that our diaspora are highly skilled, as I said before. So when the tsunami came, doctors came, volunteered their time. And people like that, that is what we need. Our diaspora can and do have the potential to play a part, but it doesn't have to be just the investment. The knowledge, the skills, the abilities, the connections that they have, that is as valuable as the money that they will invest. They are also, I would say, very important as a voice at representing the views of the Sri Lankan community. And in some cultures, as in Philippines, they have a voice in the voting as well. So they can, the potential is there for dual citizens do have that right. But diaspora have the potential to assist the country in its developments, in its trajectory, in its vision, and I think they do have a role to play. And I agree with you completely about not being a monolith. They are very diverse, and to put one in a box and say this is that, this is all they are, is quite quite wrong.
Absolutely. And so when we come back, we're going to be talking about the depth of engagement. We're going to also be looking at the process going forward, how we continue to understand who the diaspora, actually decipher what this community is of Sri Lankans who live over there, and how they can continue to contribute, and how we should remain engaged with these communities, irrespective of where they are, irrespective of their stance with regard to Sri Lanka, the importance of the diaspora, when we return with the Sri Lankan Understanding. Welcome back to the Sri Lankan Understanding. We are in conversation with Dr. Maneesha Wanasinghe Pasqual, and we're looking at Sri Lankans overseas, deciphering the diaspora. Dr. Wanasinghe Pasqual, we've looked at various aspects of the diaspora in terms of engagement, but how effectively are we engaging at present? It's very vast, it's very diverse, massive amount of difference in opinion out there with regard to opinion of Sri Lanka. Their views of Sri Lanka are very different. How are we engaging with them?
Well, first of all, we are not really engaging with them. The different embassies and high commissions have strived, you have to acknowledge that, they have strived to engage with the Sri Lankan diaspora since the mid-2000s especially, but even earlier, as soon as a new ambassador or high commissioner goes to the host country, that and we send invitations and we inform the Sri Lankans living there, and we try, but then that is for citizens of Sri Lanka, but not the diaspora, who may or may not be citizens or dual citizens of Sri Lanka. So we fall short of engaging the diaspora Rather, we engage the citizens and perhaps the dual citizens. So it's a complex way of engagement. But we have strived at the same time. We have, you can see how well or how effective and ineffective it has been when you look at when there is an event, cultural event or anything to do with Sri Lanka, you might get a certain percentage, but if you have a cricket match in that country, you get another percentage. And so you can see that the engagement by the official engagement might be a bit difficult. There is politics involved, the diversity is there, the religious differences, the cultural differences, the narratives themselves about the war, the reasons why they came. There's so many differences, and these impact how the high commissions and ambassadors are able to engage officially. But at the same time, as I said, you can engage them through other means. The sports is a wonderful mechanism to engage the Sri Lankan diaspora. They're fanatics of cricket, and they just love, when you are a diaspora, you tend to be more Sri Lankan when it comes to events, more Sri Lankan when it comes to cultural New Year events and such, than even people in Sri Lanka. It's in a way that they have frozen a time, an image of Sri Lanka which may or may not be real at the moment. But that means that it's possible to engage with the people. But there's a difficulty here again, as I said, one is that there's a limited amount who can engage with in terms of citizenship, but also about the fact that we cannot engage them when we don't have the statistics. There are so many who are first generation Sri Lankans, who then you have the statistics, but then you have their children and the children's children. This is 70 odd years of Sri Lanka being, and that is only the second and third wave, living outside of our country of origin. And in that sense, this hybrid, the Asian Americans, so it's very difficult to get the statistics. Even in a census, you don't get that statistics. We are the other, we are the Asians in that nicely categorized list. So it's a hidden group, not intentionally, but it's hidden from our statistics. And so it's very difficult to engage as well. So it's not a failure as such, but it's just the complexity of where they are, who they are. If they're famous, we know who they are. We just, oh my goodness, that person is Sri Lankan. But if it's an ordinary person, it's difficult to get, but you have to engage them because they have a voice in the host country and they have a love for Sri Lanka, which is endearing.
I guess you very rightly mentioned, if there are someone in that country, we are quick to claim ownership of them in terms of connecting up with them and wanting them to work more with the country, but those are a few. The majority of people who are in those countries are people who are working hard, who have a vote in those countries. Most importantly, as you mentioned, they have access to the legislatures, they have access to policy formulators who can thereafter influence policy with regard to Sri Lanka. And this is where we've got, from a Sri Lankan perspective, begin to understand how absolutely vital those individuals are simply because of their vote in those countries. And we cannot afford to disregard their opinion. But as we go forward, from a policy perspective, policy formulators especially, what should we be doing? You mentioned sports. That is one particular area into which we can move forward. But what else do you think we can do in terms of ensuring that in Sri Lanka there is a debate, a conversation, an understanding of who these people are?
I think first of all, maybe remove the word diaspora from a bad language. It's like a 4-letter word right now. Sri Lankans living overseas or expatriates, those are terms. Migrants, they're terms, but they don't really explain the term, the idea of diaspora. And also you have to realize, whatever we define from Sri Lanka, the people living in that host country define themselves as diaspora. So one of them is to have a discussion, a discourse at different levels, from the parliament, from within the parliament, as well as in the media, about what it means to be a diaspora. Engaging them is easy, especially in this internet society that we have. Sri Lankans, while some categories of diaspora are very active physically going to places, Sri Lankans are very active online. We are highly articulate, very opinionated, the diaspora. And you should harness that. In terms of policy, I have talked to Sri Lankan diaspora in UK, USA, Australia, and what they say is maybe some of the red tape, clarify what it is, what they expect from us, but also when we do want to invest, when we do want to say, for example, provide low income people with not housing per se, but perhaps solar power or knowledge to create solar power generators and stuff. Tell us how to go about it. Provide an avenue for us, because you're not citizens of Sri Lanka. How can we do this? And acknowledge and understand that the diaspora bring more than investments, as I kept saying. Their skills, their knowledge, their abilities, the confidence they have, that should be transferred. That should be encouraged, and there should be mentoring systems that should be harnessed. And you should not only look at from a policy point of view, but at every stage. Drama, people, they watch old films even. Some things we don't watch, they love. Why can't we harness those things? Why do we have to look at very traditional, formal interactions when majority of what they do, even remittances, happen either very traditional bank to bank, but also, oh, why don't you, I give you some money, why don't you give the money, and people giving money within the community or amongst themselves. So informal ways as well.
And this is where there's scope, so much of scope in terms of what we can do, how we can actually, going forward, going into the next decade, at least the next decade, look at ways and means of engaging them across the board, not just, as you mentioned, in one particular area. This is where we think out of the box and we try to find ways and means, because at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, we've got to accept that understanding, that attitudinal change has got to happen. We've got to understand what this word diaspora is, that the negative connotation has to be taken out, and that's something that we've got to really look at very, very seriously going forward. Otherwise, we're going to be stuck where we were. I mean, we have this notion that they've left. People have gone for economic purposes, they've sought asylum for political purposes, whatever it may be. They themselves are very diverse. They themselves are a very large community out there, which can bring back a lot of dividends for our country. And this is where, when we are going into understanding Sri Lankans overseas, talking about the contribution they are making in their new home countries, the contributions that they can make back to our country, we need to understand each other. This is where we have to make sure that there is some form of engagement. We need to be thinking out of the box, even thinking no box at all in terms of rationalizing what we are doing. But as Dr. Wanasinghe Pasqual also mentioned, we need to know what areas we want to engage with them in. We need to be aware of where we are going and take the journey forward. Thank you so much, Dr. Wanasinghe Pasqual, for joining us on the program. You've enlightened us on this topic in terms of the conversation around it, because this was also your main focus for your PhD, I understand, at the George Mason University. So thank you once again for joining us, and thank you for being a part of the Sri Lankan Understanding, where we talked about Sri Lankans overseas, deciphering the diaspora.
Thank you very much.